Good afternoon, Tache. My name is Margaret Froh. I'm the president of the Métis Nation of Ontario. Thanks for being with us today. Tomorrow, the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs begins its study of Bill C-53, our Métis self-government implementation legislation. The purpose of this legislation is to solidify the recognition our Métis governments have been pursuing for the past 200 years. Bill C-53 means our Métis governments will finally be recognized by Canada on a nation-to-nation, government-to-government basis. It's about how we elect our leaders. It's about how we determine our citizenship, how we govern ourselves, and how we take care of our Métis children. For more than 200 years, the Crown's approach to Métis assertions was to deny and ignore them. When the Crown did make bargains with our ancestors, those promises were very quickly broken. But we never relented, because the Métis are an incredibly resilient people. It has been more than 40 years since Section 35 of the Constitution was established, recognizing and affirming the Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Métis. From the failed constitutional conferences in the 1980s, to the Métis Nation Accord being rejected as a part of the Charlottetown Accord in the 1990s, to the Kelowna Accord in 2015. We have been so close to having our self-government recognized in federal law, only to have politics overtake promises or principles. Bill C-53 ensures that even as governments come and go, the recognition of our Métis self-government will not be subject to political change. The Supreme Court of Canada has been directing each federal government to do this for decades. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Pauli, which remains foundational for Métis rights assertions right across the Métis Nation homeland. It will be fitting for this legislation to pass in 2023, the 20 years anniversary after Métis rights were finally affirmed by the Supreme Court. Every Indigenous self-government agreement, every modern treaty has this type of legislation. The only thing that's different about Bill C-53 is it's the first piece that's focused on the Métis. We have worked very hard with the government to co-develop our self-government agreements and this legislation. Now, it's in the hands of Parliament. We've heard apologies for historic wrongs. And we've heard the calls to action from the final report on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We know that reconciliation with all of Canada's Indigenous peoples is Parliament's goal. Passing this legislation will advance the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in a concrete and a practical way. Passing this legislation is reconciliation in action. Today, as the committee prepares for hearings and they are about to get underway, we are calling on Parliament to support this important legislation. Let's end the centuries-old legacy of ignoring the Métis and denying our rights as an Indigenous people. We urge every member of Parliament and the Senate to move as swiftly as possible to make this legislation law. Thank you. Merci.
Hello, Tanse. My name is Andrea Sandmaier, and I am the president of the Otipemisiwak Métis government. Last month, the Métis Nation of Alberta held our first general election as the Otipemisiwak Métis government. This was a historic moment for Métis in Alberta. Our citizens elected new representatives, including myself as president, under a new governance structure and constitution. We did this because we are self-governing, and our signed agreements with the Government of Canada recognize that. Bill C-53 implements our agreements and protects them. It ensures our Métis governments are equipped to support our citizens. Self-government means that we decide for ourselves how to best support Métis in Alberta. We decide what our housing and health programs look like. We decide how to help prepare our young people with world-class education and training. We decide how to support our elders as they age. And we decide how to move forward together. Only through self-government will the voices of Métis people truly be heard. That is why Bill C-53 must be passed. Anything that delays its passage is actively contributing to re-traumatizing Métis people. We are hearing anecdotal reports from our citizens that the tensions between First Nations and Métis are following them beyond the political arena and into their personal lives. The only way to bring an end to those tensions is to pass Bill C-53 swiftly. It is imperative that we get Bill C-53, our Métis self-government legislation, passed. Bill C-53 will mean our Métis governments can finally protect our Métis children by having a say over the child welfare system that has torn our communities and families apart for generations. Bill C-53 is about our election process, our governance structure, our citizenship, and our children. It means we decide, not other governments. Our people in our communities making decisions for themselves. Today, we are calling on all parliamentarians to support this important legislation. This historic step forward is long overdue. Passing this legislation is reconciliation in action. Our Section 35 rights as Indigenous peoples are not a zero-sum game. The advancement of self-government and Section 35 rights of one of Indigenous government does not come at the expense of any other Indigenous government. We know that when one Indigenous government advances, it sets the path for all of us to move forward. The citizens of the Otipemisiwak Métis government deserve to advance in reconciliation just like all other Indigenous people. To finally end Canada's legacy of ignoring the Métis and denying our rights as Indigenous people, Parliament must now pass this legislation. Thank you.
Questions?
Hi, Alessia from the Canadian Press. The Chiefs of Ontario said this week that it's not reasonable to ask First Nations to have a dialogue with the MNO, and that your request to have dialogue at the 11th hour isn't a genuine attempt to engage with First Nations. What would you say to Chiefs of Ontario about that?
Thanks for the question, Alessia. Nice to meet you. This is not in any way an 11th hour request. And in fact, I've been writing to Regional Chief Glenn Hare since he was elected, asking for meetings and inviting him to our assembly, and really inviting a dialogue with First Nations. Unfortunately, that hasn't been taken up. And so we genuinely seek that open dialogue with First Nations, one that's based on fact, one that's respectful, and one where we can talk about how we can advance all Indigenous peoples, First Nations and Métis alike.
And I'm assuming you didn't hear back from them when you released the video then?
No, we've had no response to any of our invitations. Yeah.
And you both spoke about what Bill C-53 is in terms of education and elections, but when the last time we spoke, the minister kind of alluded that land could also be in the question after the agreement is signed, and you had said the same thing. Why not talk about that when that is one of the concerns that First Nations have?
So, and I think it's important to be really clear. If you read Bill C-53, there is no mention of land, there's no mention of resources, there's no mention of claims or even compensation for past wrongs. Bill C-53 and our agreements don't address those things. Whereas Bill C-53 will be that legislative cradle for future agreements. And so when the time comes, if we do end up into those negotiations, there will be obviously opportunities for dialogue should the duty to consult be triggered.
Just my only ones, thank you.
Thank you.
So if you have any more.
Sure. What are you guys hoping for tomorrow? And as
What are you hoping for
like
tomorrow?
obviously to be passed, but like what are you hoping comes out of it? Like if the legislation is passed, what would that mean for your communities?
Well, it means a lot for our communities. It means that we get to decide and build programs that are for us, for our citizens, so that they're culturally appropriate. It means that we're finally recognized, and it's been over 200 years of work that we've been doing, that our ancestors have been working on. We can go back and look at the Métis Nation of Alberta history, and in the in the founding documents in 1928, they talked about self-government. So it just means a lot to our citizens. We've had a lot of false starts, a lot of broken promises, and we want to get this bill passed so we can move forward.
The last time we spoke, you talked about the education initiatives and child welfare, I believe, that were happening in Northern Ontario. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that and what you've been seeing with those programs in place.
No, that's fine. Sure, and actually going back to your last question, Alessia, I'm really excited about tomorrow. Tomorrow is the first opportunity where we have to actually speak to the legislation and to hear from members of the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee, hear their questions, hear what concerns they may be hearing from constituents, and to be able to provide some good, full answers. And I think, that dialogue isn't happening directly with First Nations. I think the committee process is an opportunity for us to actually get, again, that good, clear information out there, and hopefully that will spark some dialogue. Last time we spoke, we absolutely talked about the importance of our self-government agreement that we signed in February and Bill C-53. It recognizes what we have always said in terms of the inherent rights that our communities hold, the inherent rights of self-determination, the inherent right of self-government. But it also speaks to our right to take care of our own children. And one of the things that I think is very exciting is the pilot project that our Northwestern Ontario Métis community has undertaken, where they have consulted with citizens across that community and got a clear direction to say, we want to create a Métis child welfare organization or agency that will be there to really focus on prevention and supporting Métis children and families in that regional community. Our other regional communities within Ontario are also looking to see what do they want to create. And I think that's one of the exciting things about Bill C-53. It recognizes our Métis governments as Indigenous governing bodies for the purposes of Métis child welfare. And as President Sandmaier was saying, self-government means we get to decide. We are the best situated to understand the needs of our people, the needs of our children, the needs of our families and our communities, and we will finally be in a position where that is respected and we have the opportunity to make those decisions and provide those supports. So that work is incredibly exciting, and I think the more and more we have opportunities to empower our communities to really lean into what do they want to see, what is the future for Métis within their communities. That's really what C-53 is all about.
Yeah.
Looks like we have no further questions. Do you have anything else like to add?
Did you want to go? Go ahead. So I'll just come back to this is an important moment in Canada's history. So Parliament has, as I said earlier, every Indigenous self-government agreement, every modern-day treaty has this type of legislation that accompanies it. It's the tool that Canada needs in order to recognize properly Indigenous governments. And so in many respects, Bill C-53 is very much like all of those other 26-plus pieces of legislation that have come before Parliament. They are nonpartisan. We've seen all parties support Indigenous self-government in this country. What's different about and exciting about Bill C-53 is that of all those 26-plus pieces of legislation, this is the first one that actually focuses on the Métis. And so, again, we're very excited to see tomorrow come. We are, the fact that there is a 6+ days of hearings before INAN, I think, is a rather extraordinary amount in terms of the length of study, and that is concerning to us. But we are really looking forward to the opportunity to, as I said earlier, to have Parliament, to have the Senate give the same respect and fair process to Métis self-government as they've done with every other piece of Indigenous legislation that's come forward. So we welcome the opportunity to be before the committee tomorrow and a good dialogue that I'm sure will ensue.
And I just want to add that, with the study coming, the committee will hear from citizens and hear how it's important to them. And I just want to say that my late elder Francis Dumais he always told me there was never a Cree word for reconciliation. That the closest he could find is setting things straight. And that needs to happen now. Canada needs to set things straight for our citizens. We've gone far too long without this recognition, so it's time. Thank you.
Merci.